Hi, I'm Peter Friend. I'm a poet. Did you know that writers sometimes just make up new words? That's what we're going to talk about today. Making up new words. Let me begin by sharing with you a poem that was published a few years ago in a magazine for schools here in Australia. It's just a tiny little poem of 8 lines, but in it there are 16 words that I, as the poet, just made up. Yet it seems to work. Why? Because this was a poem about a swamp, and I wanted to get across the idea of mysterious creatures that might live in a swamp. Let me share with you this little poem and see, while I'm performing it, if you can pick up those 16 new words that I just made up. Here's the poem. Swamp Poem. The brackled water gurgs and slumes, the green slab spume explodes. I hear the burbs and goolabooms of largs and murfs and troads. I watch the gombled eeldat swarm amongst the stunkling weed. Was that a grangle I saw squirm beneath the aquamead? So that's the poem. Were you able to pick up the 16 words that I just made up? Let's have a look at it now and see how those made-up words work. Let's look at the first 2 lines. The first line begins, the brackled water gurgs and slumes. 6 words. 3 of them we already know from English. They're the word the word water, and the word and. But the other 3 are all made up. But actually, there's a couple of clues that help us when we try and understand that line. First of all, we already know that the poem is about a swamp. That's really helpful, actually, because we know that the water in the first line is talking about the water of a swamp. But what about the word brackled? What's that? Well, notice that it comes between the word the and the word water, which means that in English, because we know how English works, we know that that must be an adjective. It's a describing word for water. In fact, it also ends in ed. Quite a few adjectives in English end in ed. They're a particular sort of adjective, known as a passive participle, but you don't have to know that. All you need to do is recognise that because of its position, that word brackled must be an adjective. What does it mean? I don't really know. There is an adjective in English called brackish that you might have heard of before. That means a bit salty and a bit fresh. So perhaps brackled is a bit like that. But what about the other 2 words, gurgs and slumes? Well, again, because we know how the English language works, because we use it all the time, we understand that those 2 words must be verbs. In other words, they're something that the swamp water is doing. Gurging and sluming. What do those mean? Well, your imagination can go wild, but at least we know that it's something that a swamp will be doing. Perhaps it's the sound that the swamp is making. Maybe gurgs is like gurgling. What's slume? Maybe it's another sound, or maybe it's a movement of the swamp. Let's look at the second line. The green slab spume explodes. Again, there's 2 words that we already know from English, the word the and the word explodes. But what about those other 2 words? Well, again, our knowledge of how English works helps us. First of all, we understand from its position in that little sentence that spume must be another noun. What it means, we don't quite know. Perhaps it's related to scum, which would sort of work for something on the surface of a swamp. And then there's this word before it, which again is in a position where it needs to be, in English, an adjective. Green slab. What's that? Actually, this is a fairly interesting word, isn't it? You can see that it's in 2 halves, and both of those are words that we already know in English. The word green and the word slab. So it sort of gets across an idea of what this swamp might be like. It might have a surface that's a bit hard and thick, and it might be green like a slab of green. Well, let's look now at the next two lines, lines 3 and 4. And this is where it starts to get really exciting, I think, in this tiny little poem, because now we meet the actual creatures of this swamp. It says, I hear the burbs and goolabooms of largs and murfs and troads. Here we've got 5 new words, and they're all nouns. You can sort of see that they must be nouns from the way that they're used in these couple of lines. But there's another clue that actually helps us find out what these different words refer to. Notice how it begins, I hear. So that sort of is an indication to us that what follows after us are a couple of sounds. Burbs. What's a burb? I don't really know. Perhaps it's like a burp that's really big. And what about goolaboom? That's probably a sound too that maybe is a great big booming sound that comes out from the swamp. But notice the structure of this particular sentence, because it then says that those sounds are of largs and murfs and troads. So here we have, it seems, the names of creatures in the swamp. And they're so mysterious that I'm pretty sure that everyone who listens to this poem or who reads this poem will get a different picture of what these creatures are. What's a larg? What's a murf? What's a troad? Well, our imagination can go wild. Let's have a look now at the next couple of lines, because here we meet another creature from the swamp. Lines 5 and 6. I watch the gombled eeldat swarm amongst the stunkling weed. Again, we have some made-up words. There's 4 new words in these couple of lines. And in that line 5, they're a little bit trickier because we have 3 made-up words in a row. I watch the gombled eildats swarm. What does that mean? Well, once again, we can bring our knowledge of how English works and untangle the sorts of words that they must be. It seems that now we have eildats as another creature, and it's got an adjective before it, which is gombled. Again, it's one of those adjectives that ends in ed, isn't it? What's an eildat? Your imagination can go wild. Perhaps it's like an eel, but it's different. And then at the end of that line, we have this little word, swarm. Because of its position, we understand that, oh, okay, it's a verb. It's something that these eildats are doing. What's swarming? Well, perhaps it's a bit like swimming and it's a bit like squirming. At least that's what I, as the poet, was thinking when I came up with that word. And then there's the next line, amongst the stunkling weed. Once again, we have a new word, but again it's in the position where we'd expect to see an adjective. This one, interestingly, ends in ing. A lot of adjectives actually in English end in ing. They're a different sort, known as an active participle. But again, you don't need to know that term. You just need to recognise that it's in the right sort of position to be an interesting adjective. What's stunkling? Perhaps it's got something related to the words stink or stank. That would make sense here. And then finally, we come to the last 2 lines of this little poem. Was that a grangle I saw squirm beneath the aquamead? Again, we have some new words. We have grangle, which, because it's got the A before it, we understand is another noun. So here is another creature of the swamp. What does a grangle look like? I'd be really interested to know what's going on in your imagination right now. Then, in the last line, we have this, beneath the aquamead. So this little poem finishes with another made-up word, the 16th made-up word in this little poem of 8 lines. Aquamead. What's that? Well, again, we can see that it's got the word the before it, so it's some sort of noun. And I think we understand from context the sort of meaning that it might have. It's an interesting word to finish with, And I can actually tell you a little bit about it. As the poet, I can tell you a little bit of the thoughts that I was thinking when I came up with this final word. It's a word that has two parts to it. The first part is aqua, which I think we understand because we know that that means water from other words that perhaps we know in the English language. And then there's the half that says mead. That's a little bit more puzzling. I can tell you as the poet that I was thinking of another English word, meadow, which is spelt M-E-A-D-O-W. So I took a little bit of that word, which means a hillside that is full of vegetation, and I put that together with water to think of a place that could be filled with vegetation with water. In other words, at the end of the poem, I came up with a synonym for swamp. And it was also useful because I needed something that would rhyme with weed, and aquamead does. So that's my poem about a swamp. I had great fun in this poem, making up new words that I don't think anyone had ever heard before. But they were really valuable because they helped depict this scene of a swamp with its crazy creatures that no one had ever seen. I wonder if you too can make up some totally new words. It's especially useful if you come up with some scenario in your head where there might be mysterious creatures. Can you think of a scenario like that? If you need some help, here are 5 ideas for you. You could write about a jungle, or an alien planet, or deep under the sea, or drains under a city, or a fantasy forest. Whatever you choose, have fun making up new words to describe these crazy creatures of yours. I hope you have a lot of fun with this writing exercise yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.